17% of Democrats came out and voted. Of those 17% of the Democrats, 60% of them did not vote for Vincent Orange, yet Vincent Orange is our city councilman. We need to move away and do what 77% of the rest of the United States has done, which is to go to nonpartisan elections with the top two vote-getters being able to face each other in a general election. It has to happen. The same group of people that are on the election.
Your time is up.
All right. And so, with that in mind, I just wanted to say that I'll paraphrase LeBron James. Because of that, I am dropping out of the Democratic primary, and I am going to take my talents to the general election where I'll run as an independent. So that would be it.
Okay. Moving on now, Mr. Graham, would you like to make a 1-minute statement?
1 minute. Well, I'm delighted to be here. I just want to say to you that I'm a progressive with a record. So you can look and see what I have done, and you can appraise it for yourself. But we have done a great deal in Ward 1. We have transformed Ward 1 while still maintaining our rich diversity. We have done things that make a difference in terms of human beings in Ward 1. I'm very proud of my record as chairman of the Human Services Committee, where we have fought for TANF recipients. We have fought against the cuts. We have fought for programs so that people can move from dependency to self-sufficiency, but get the training they need, overcome the obstacles to employment, deal with substance abuse, literacy, and other issues, and keep people from being unemployed. And so these are the real achievements that I feel very strongly about and that work so well for the people. I just want to conclude by saying I learned all of that at Whitman Walker Clinic, where for 15 years I was the director fighting one of the great epidemics of this world. And so I learned there that what it takes to really bring about meaningful change for people. Thank you.
Ms. Nadeau.
Thank you. I first want to thank Brian Weaver for all the work that he does in our ward and to congratulate him on this decision and ask that those of his supporters who are coming out April 1st will consider supporting our movement. I am someone who grew up in a household that was committed to progressive values and campaigns and candidates, and I came to Washington, D.C. 12 years ago so that I could work on those issues and got involved in my community, first in the neighborhood association and then for 4 years on the ANC. And during that time, I got to know folks in the community who started talking to me about how here in DC, they want to build a life just like me, but they're having trouble making ends meet. They're not sure how they're going to find affordable housing to raise their families in, and how they don't believe the schools are strong enough to put their kids in. And these are the issues that I want to work on with this campaign. We're building a progressive movement for change, an ethical campaign, and we want to bring you all along with us, and I hope we can talk about that more tonight.
Thank you very much. First question, and you will have 2 minutes to respond to this question. The poll results reported in Monday's Washington Post show substantial opposition to the proposed soccer stadium deal. How might the deal between the district and DC United be structured to win your support for the city's participation in the soccer stadium project? Mr. Graham, would you go first for 2 minutes?
Thank you. Well, I've been very clear about this. My vote for and this all has to go before the council. The council has to approve the entire deal. My vote will depend upon two things. Number one, the numbers have to make sense. The numbers have to make sense. You know, I have a feeling that what we have here is a major giveaway to a major corporate interest in Washington, D.C. We're not going to sell the Reef Center low and buy scrappy pieces of parcels of land in Buzzards Point high. That this doesn't make any sense. So give us good numbers that show that it's a fair exchange and that it really works. And second, U Street needs the daytime commerce. I have worked very hard to transform U Street over the years, and the loss of that building to another retail residential, let me tell you, we've got the luxury condo bit covered in 14th Street. We got them. We've got the $10,000 a month apartments. We've got the $1.4 million condos. What we need is to maintain daytime commerce, which includes the groups that are there now, the post office, the DC Center. We need that for the farmers market to remain, and we also need space for nonprofits to have offices. So that's what we need. If we have that, then I'm going to be willing to support a soccer stadium. Thank you.
Ms. Nadeau.
Thank you. I've been to DC United game. If any of you have been, you know the wonderful energy that comes out of that stadium, and how great the crowd is and how it really brings the community together. And it's something I want to support. I want to see a new stadium for the team. I think that the DC Fiscal Policy Institute has laid out some very real concerns about the deal, and on top of that, there has not been transparency. There has not been a community voice in the process. So I want to be sure that we have a fair deal for the people, that all the numbers work out, that this is not going to be a raw deal for the taxpayers. But I've also got this local lens also on U Street. In fact, I've worked with community leaders. Now more than 300 people have signed our petition to maintain commercial at that building so that we can support our daytime retailers. And we're thrilled that Councilmember Graham is joining our effort on that. But one of the things that I think about when I see a deal like this is, what is the makeup of our council? Do we have an ethical body that's going to ensure that as the pieces of this deal come together with all of the power brokers at the table, then instead of pay-to-play politics, instead of backroom deals, we're going to get the best deal for the people of the district, for our taxpayers. So that's what I'm focused on. Thank you. And if we can ensure that every dollar we put into this deal comes back and helps with the revitalization of our community, building a new government office, and allows those of us on U Street who've worked for so long to bring daytime foot traffic with our hotel project and now this, then I will support it.
Thank you. In my eagerness to get this thing started, I forgot to introduce somebody who's playing a vital role in this forum, and that's our timekeeper, John Zatoli, who's sitting down here with holding up the signs. Thank you very, very much, John. Moving on to question 2. What do you believe the top individual tax income rate should be, and at what income level should it begin? Ms. Nadeau, would you go first?
Thanks for that. This is something that I worked on as a board member of Jews United for Justice. In fact, a few years back, we won that battle to increase the highest tax bracket up to $350,000. So I'd be open to increasing it up to maybe even 975. 9.75, sorry, percent. And also, I think we need another bracket in there at 150,000. And in my testimony to the Tax Revision Commission recently, I was focused on that, but also in the reforms in general, we need to make sure that we are increasing the standard deduction for the lowest income earners, and creating more tax subsidies there, because we need to shift the burden entirely and get back to an actual progressive tax code. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Graham.
In point of fact, the DC poor paid more toward closing the budget gap than the highest wage earners in the District of Columbia. And there's something very wrong with that picture. In other words, the cuts we made in TANF, the cuts we made in other social programs, all of which I voted no on, constituted more than the increases that we made in the highest earners income tax brackets. I was the co-author of that. Your organization may have played a role in terms of lobbying, but I think the council was where the fight was, and it was a tough fight. And I have consistently favored higher taxes on those who have a greater ability to pay, and I've consistently opposed any increases in the sales tax, which is a regressive tax that falls unequally on those with the least ability to pay. I remember fighting on the Metro Board against a 10-cent increase on bus fares, and I won. I won because I said this is going to fall unequally on those who are reliant on bus transportation, who must have the buses. They take family and children and everybody else on the buses. Let's not make them pay for what we need to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Please hold your applause until we complete the panel, so we can keep moving. Councilmember Kenyon McDuffie proposes shifting 1/4 of our unreserved surplus funds to the Housing Production Trust Fund. Do you support this proposal? How would you modify it? 1 minute, beginning Mr. Graham.
Yes, I'm a co-introducer.
Thanks for saving us all that time. Ms. Nadeau.
I purchased my home 5 years ago using the Home Purchase Assistance Program, which is funded by the Housing Production Trust Fund. And when I'm moving around talking to voters out there, this is one of the big issues we hear, is how are we affording housing, whether it's home purchase, co-op, more rental units. So we need to be fully funding the Housing Production Trust Fund. We need new sources of income to it, so I do support this. I think this is a really important way of moving forward with long-term solutions for affordability.
Thank you. Next question. There's a proposal being developed to make Dunbar High School, which has recently moved into a brand-new building, an application-only school, as opposed to a neighborhood school. Do you think this is the right approach to an improved education system? Ms. Nadeau, would you begin?
My top priority in this campaign is strengthening our neighborhood schools. And there is so much pride in Dunbar in that alumni network, and so I understand where they're coming from. But my big concern here is that if Dunbar becomes application only, what will happen to the kids in Ward 5, for which this is the only matter of right school? And these are the exact concerns that we have in Ward 1 with families, is why are our matter of right schools not as strong as some of these other specialty schools that we have? So I would encourage, I hope the end result of this will be that some portion of Dunbar remains matter of right. And my vision for stronger neighborhood schools is real community engagement to bolster all of the efforts we've made in reform, where we're providing kids with all kinds of wraparound services, from healthcare to behavioral support to mentoring, tutoring, and after-school jobs.
I would be against it.
Sorry?
I would be against that. Because I think that, this in Ward 1 is Adams. Adams was merged into Oyster to become Oyster Adams. And the neighborhood has just recently realized just what this has meant in terms of community engagement. We're now taking the community out of Adams School because it's all about Oyster Adams as an independent, non-boundary school. And so I think we've got to bring the schools back into our neighborhoods. We've got to have neighborhood schools. I went to neighborhood schools. I went to neighborhood elementary school, junior high school, within walking distance of all of them. And I think this has got to be our objective again. Now, where the schools are weak, which is sometimes the case, then we need to consider other options on an ASAP basis to strengthen those schools so that they can become strong neighborhood schools. Thank you.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. Do you support ban-the-box legislation prohibiting private sector employers from asking about criminal convictions on job applications?
Yes, I was an original introducer of that. Oh, is it my turn, or did I jump the gun?
Go right ahead.
I was an original introducer of that bill, which became law insofar as the D.C. government. We've had it in place at the D.C. government now for about 4 years. There has not been major problems. We definitely have to have it in terms of the whole city. We have returning citizens and residents who really must have an opportunity to put their lives back together, their families back together, and not be excluded from jobs on the basis of a check on a box. And so I'm very strongly in favor of this. I'm a co-introducer again, and I think it's something that we really need to do.
This is a very personal issue for me. A few years ago, my uncle went to prison and served time and came back, and starting your life over again after leaving society like that is very difficult. Forgiveness is a very tricky thing, and healing from that is very difficult. And because of the opportunities that he was given for work, he was able to get back on his feet in the private sector with a good job and work his way back into society. And we cannot be putting barriers before people like a box on an application form when they have paid their debt to society and are now trying to make it right and reintegrate into society. And that's it for me.
Okay. Let's have a big round of applause for our Ward 1 Council candidates. Thank you very much. Have our Ward 6 candidates come to the stage? Ah, a souvenir, yeah. I do forget. Yeah, great. Okay, let's proceed with the Ward 6 portion of the agenda. Sorry. Who's joined us? Oh. Okay. As I indicated previously, each candidate has 1 minute in which to introduce themselves and state whatever they wish to about their priorities. We'll begin with Mr. Allen.
Well, good evening, everybody. My name is Charles Allen, and I appreciate everybody being out here tonight. It's great to see so many friends in the audience. You know, it was somebody earlier this week mentioned to me that it was 10 years ago, pretty much to the day, that Howard Dean let out his scream in Iowa. And we basically turned DC for Dean into DC for Democracy that day. And it has been a leading voice in our city for progressive values that we all share. And I'm very proud to have been the founding chair of that organization and to have worked with so many of you on a lot of our causes. You know, it's part of who I am, it's part of the values that I know we all share, and it's part of what allows you, I think, to have confidence in me. You know my compass, you know where my feet are planted. When we fought for paid sick for all our workers, I was there and I was fighting with you. When we fought for campaign finance and election reform, I was there and you were fighting with me. When we fought for a minimum wage increase for 40,000 workers, I was there and you were with me. I'm excited about the
Your time is up.
Thank you.
Mr. Thompson, 1 minute.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Darrell Thompson, and I'm delighted to have the opportunity to address everyone here this evening. I got in this race to bring new leadership and to be a bold voice for the people of Ward 6. You know, Ward 6 has exploded. It's not the ward it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, or even 20 years ago when I moved in. The challenges we face are challenges to improve our education, to make sure that there's parity in education, make sure we provide affordable housing. I look forward to the opportunity to visit with all of you, to talk with you about these issues. In my past, I've worked on a lot of these issues. A lot of you know my background and the work I've done, working to pass the last federal minimum wage increase, working on a lot of the issues that you all face and love and care about in this community. So thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight, and I look forward to talking with you further.
Ms. Tillman.
Thank you, everyone. I'm Dr. Shalonda Tillman. I entered into this race because I am a resident of Ward 6 for 37 years. My family has lived in Ward 6 for over 70 years. I actually entered into this race as a mom of 4 children. My children actually attend Ward 6 schools, and one attends a DC charter school, Basis Elementary public charter school, and I do have a son who is a DC firefighter. I entered into this race because I'm concerned with the crime and safety of our neighborhoods as far as my family is concerned. I'm a former student and teacher of Easton High School. I'm concerned with the quality of education and how our middle schools are suffering in Ward 6. I am a business owner, and I'm concerned with the economic opportunity and development that is lacking for minorities in our ward. I'm also concerned, I have a doctorate of organization leadership, and I'm concerned with the caliber of leadership, not only in our ward, but also in our city council. And this is why I entered into this race. Thank you.
Okay, first question is one you may have heard before, because I just asked it of the Ward 1 candidates. It's of very great importance to both wards. A poll in Monday's Washington Post reveals substantial opposition to the proposed soccer stadium deal. How might the deal between the district and the new DC United be structured to win your support for the city's participation in the soccer stadium? Begin with Mr. Allen and go.
2 minutes.
1 minute. Okay. Yes?
1 minute?
1 minute.
Okay. Thank you. You know, I'd like to find my way to support the soccer stadium. I really would. There's a couple of things that I've got to see in order to get there. The first is an investment in the Southwest community in the immediate areas around where the proposed stadium is. It's currently scrap yards and parking lots, but it's also right next to a lot of people's homes. And an investment has to be made in Syfax and James Creek and the surrounding community that hasn't been made in a long time. That's the very first thing I've got to see. The second is in the same way when the city built the baseball stadium, it invested in Yards Park. Yards Park is an amazing park and public asset that has really activated a community in Southeast. Southwest needs its own Yards Park, and I want to see the city invest in the same type of park and amenity and public space. And the third thing I've got to see is an investment in our athletic space and our field space near RFK. We have an opportunity to transform an ocean of asphalt into athletic fields into green space, and something that is really has to do with
Time is up.
justice along the Anacostia River. Thank you.
Mr. Thompson, 1 minute.
Thank you. I want to see economic development take place. Make sure that if we sign off on a project at Buzzard Point for the soccer stadium, it's got to be done in a way that provides economic opportunity for all residents. I'm not prepared right now to say that I want to see that done before we continue to invest in our schools. I'm not prepared to say that I want to see the soccer stadium done unless we are making sure that we're providing career training opportunities for the people in Ward 6 that are going to be there. This can get started.
Ms. Tillman, could you hand your mic
Is
to...
that better?
Oh, you got it? Okay.
I'll start over, if that's okay.
Okay, we'll start a fresh 1 minute for Mr. Thompson.
Listen, you know, this is an interesting proposal, but before we sign off on a soccer stadium at Buzzard Point, we've got to make sure that we provide opportunities. We have to make sure that we are ensuring economic opportunities for the people of Ward 6. There has to be training opportunities, career training opportunities. I think, you know, we have to make sure that we provide for additional options for the folks that are right there in Southwest. But the other side of this that's important is we've got an idle facility right now. We've got an idle facility right there at RFK Stadium that used to be a part of Ward 6. So before we sign off to allow the trading of city assets and city resources to build this stadium, let's take advantage of the existing resources we have. Let's take advantage of the opportunity to continue to fix our schools as well as put people to work.
Ms. Tillman, 1 minute. Excuse me.
Honestly, I would love to see a soccer stadium built in Ward 6. My concern is the bottom line, the return on our investment. And when the return on our investments includes the surrounding communities in Ward 6 that we have not invested into for a long time. Greenleaf, Syfax Gardens, those areas will be highly affected by the soccer stadium. When I look into those areas, it's been the same way as it was when I was a kid. We need to invest into those places first. If we do the soccer stadium, I want to make sure that it's feasible for everyone, that there's a buy-in from the community where we can create a sense of urgency to make sure that those people in those surrounding communities can have the first opportunity for jobs. And what I want to do is see our tax base increase and also decrease our dependency. And we can do that by giving them jobs. Again, we have Stadium Armory where there's enormous amounts of asphalt that haven't been built. And we can put it there and offer it as far as... Time. Thank you. It would be great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Moving on to the next question. And we'll begin with Dr. Tillman this time and come back the opposite way. DC's minimum wage of $2.77 per hour for tipped restaurant workers is lower than that in more than half of U.S. states and remains unchanged in the recent minimum wage legislation. Would you support an increase in the tipped minimum wage? And if
Yes.
so, to what level?
Yes, I would support an increase in minimum wage. As a former waitress in college, I lived off of tips. Many of my tips were very, very minimal. Even though we did receive a base pay as a waitress, it wasn't enough. President Obama said last night, if you want to see an increase, don't wait for the government, increase it. I think restaurant owners should increase the minimum wage for their employees. And it should be, honestly, it should be at the minimum wage what it is now. And I really, really support that.
Thank you. Mr. Thompson, 1
The
minute.
answer is yes, and it should be at 70% of the minimum wage. You're talking to someone that was a part of the last legislative team to increase the federal minimum wage. I've worked on this issue. I come from a background where this was a very major issue in places where I worked. You know, some of our tip employees are the fabric of our city. You know, we should not be in a situation where we are sacrificing some of our wage earners in the service industry, which is an integral part of our city here in the district, to ensure that some of our restaurateurs operate on lean margins. This is something we can do. This is something we should do. We've done it.
Thank you. Mr. Allen.
Thank you. You know, when I think about this issue, I really think about our hospitality industry, and I think about it as a part of a real career path for creating a middle class in the district. And I think that they're good jobs. It's a growing sector of our economy, and it's something that we've got to address and make sure we're taking care of those employees. We have to acknowledge that increasing to 70% or 100% credit for tipped employees is going to be a significant impact for our local businesses. We also have to acknowledge we raised the minimum wage and we did not touch the $2.77. So I do support an increase. What I would prefer to do is that we actually take a regional approach. In the same way that we were successful in building a coalition that raised the minimum wage in Maryland and in the district, I'd like to take the same approach, work with ROC, work with JUFJ, work with DC for Democracy, and we're going to increase that. We're going to increase it on a regional approach so that we create a great level playing field that supports our employees, tipped and non-tipped, and make sure they've got a living wage.
Okay, thank you very much. Next question, we'll start with Mr. Thompson, and then Ms. Tillman, and then Mr. Allen. Some jurisdictions, including our neighbors in Tacoma Park, allow permanent legal residents who are not citizens to vote in local elections. What are your thoughts on a proposal to do the same thing in the district?
You're talking to someone that's worked on comprehensive immigration reform for almost 9 years. This has to be done. This has to be our first priority. We talked about securing our borders, yes, but we also have to create a path for citizenship for the folks that are already here. However, the proposal that we're talking about, I think, I'm not ready to support it this time. We've talked about statehood. We've talked about full voting rights for the District of Columbia. We are not Maryland. We are not Virginia. We are not Tacoma Park. If we're serious about actually getting statehood and getting full voting rights, we have to make sure that our elections are as clean as possible. We can't do that. We would invite all kinds of criticism if we take that step. And I understand there may be those that think that this is the right way to go. But I can assure you, those within the national media, those within the local media, we can't forget where we are. We take the opportunity to lampoon the District of Columbia and our residents. We have to make sure our elections stay as clean as possible, and this is something that I think is important.
And Ms. Tillman?
Can you ask the question one more time, please?
1 minute.
Can you ask the question one more time? Can you repeat the question one more time?
Okay, always will repeat once and only
Thank you.
once. Okay. Some jurisdictions, including our neighbors in Tacoma Park, allow permanent legal residents who are not citizens to vote in local elections. What are your thoughts on a proposal to do the same in D.C.?
Okay. My thoughts on that is, I am a born and bred United States citizen. At this time, I do not think I would support that. I say that because in order to have fair practices in voting rights, I think that we should be citizens of the United States. If you are an illegal immigrant, then what can we do to work towards you gaining citizenship for the United States or in Washington, D.C., especially in Ward 6? We have to implement some programs in place to make sure that your status as a citizen is legal. So at this time, I won't support that.
Thank you. Mr. Allen?
Well, this isn't an issue about undocumented immigrants. It's not an issue around border security. This is an issue around making sure that residents can fully participate in their local government and in their community. I strongly support this. To suggest that this is somehow going to be a threat to DC statehood, I just fundamentally disagree. Sometimes the district has to stand up and has to stand out. When the federal government shut down, the district didn't just roll with that. We stood up and we stood back against that. I think that this is something where we need to fully embrace all of our residents. Our immigrant communities are here. They are a fabric, they are a vital part of the fabric of our community. And so I think this is something I would strongly support and something I will co-introduce if the council doesn't pass it already.
Okay, thank you very much. I did get everybody on that one, did I? Okay. Next question. According to the DC Fiscal Policy Institute, DC has lost more than 36,000 units of low-cost rental units, those charging less than $750 a month, since 2002. How do you propose to address this problem? Mr. Allen, would you begin first? I will repeat it one time. That's the policy, only one time. According to the DC Fiscal Policy Institute, DC has lost more than 36,000 units of low-cost rental units. That's a little. Those that are rent at less than $750 a month since 2002. And how do you propose to address this problem?
Well, part of this is making sure that we are funding in a stronger way and in a permanent way all of our housing programs. So when we talk about the local rent supplement program, it's something that's got to be funded and we have to make it a priority. When we talk about emergency rental assistance, we have to fund it and make it a priority. When we talk about the Housing Production Trust Fund, we have to fund it in the baseline budget. We need to fund it in a way that is permanent and doesn't go in the ups and downs of a market. This is an important part of making sure that we have every neighborhood is a place where everyone can call it home. One of the priorities that I'm making this campaign is also a conversation around family-based affordable housing. One of the things that we have done a lot of is build a lot of studios and one-bedrooms. One of the things that I'm very concerned about is that we've got to have family-based affordable housing, 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom units that help support our families and make sure that they are affordable in every neighborhood, in every community, not only in Ward 6, but really across the city. And those are going to be some of my priorities as we face affordable housing.
Thompson?
You asked the question earlier about Councilmember McDuffie's proposal to properly fund the Housing Production Trust Fund. I would welcome the opportunity to vote for that. I think we have to be smart about this. We've got to make sure that we're providing large-scale development of affordable housing. Doing that, fixing the production trust fund at a rate that allows for a subsidy to actually develop affordable housing at a large scale. So we're not trying to eyedrop a handful of affordable units into market rate development. When we put people to work in the city and people start to transition into a full career, one of the things that they quickly realize is they can't afford to live here. So this is something we've got to do. We've got to do this right. The other thing we've got to do, we can't repurpose district land every time we have it available for condominiums. This is district land that gives us an opportunity to actually repurpose this land for affordable housing as well.
Stillman?
With the average median income in Washington, D.C. is estimated around $62,000, and the average teacher, firefighter, police officer, nurse makes at least $55,000. Where's their affordability? For people who are working and put their lives on the line every day to protect the citizens of Washington, D.C. and Ward 6, and then have to go home into Maryland or other states because they cannot afford to live here is uncalled for. We really have to increase our affordable housing for our residents. When we increase the affordable housing, we can actually increase the tax base for the city. We can also create more retail spaces. We can also increase jobs for our contractors. I believe that this has to be implemented immediately because more families are moving out of DC because they are being priced out because the housing is not affordable. So I definitely will work with Department of Housing, developers to make sure that the properties that are being built are affordable for all residents, not just some.
Thank you very much. So one more question. Again, you may have heard this question already tonight, but it's important. What do you believe the top individual income tax rate should be, and at what income level should it begin? Mr. Allen?
So 2 years ago, many of us fought together and I think really accomplished the first step, and that was to create the bracket at 8.95% at 350 and above. And I think that we have created and taken the first steps towards a more progressive tax structure, and that's a very good and important thing. I am committed to making sure we protect that and that we keep that rate on upper income households. What I'd also like to do, though, is work on how we reduce our taxes at the moderate and lower income. An important part of how we accomplish that is with the standard deduction. It's something that, as council staff, I drafted legislation to do exactly that. It's something the Tax Commission has supported, and it's something I think a lot of people in this room strongly support. I've got a track record of fighting for that. We're going to get this done. It's an important part of making sure working families are keeping more of their paycheck at home and making sure that our city remains and continues to be affordable for all.
Mr. Thompson?
Tax bracket at 8.95% for our highest wage income at 350 is the right way to go. This is something I also worked on at the federal level. We took steps to come up with additional revenue to provide more services for some of our residents. This is something I think that's important. It's also important that we also provide subsidies and certainly cut our burden for some of our lower income families. So I think this is how we need to move forward.
Ms. Dillon?
I do have to agree with my fellow candidates on this issue. I believe that the tax bracket should be at 8.9% and that the medium taxes should be at 350. For the low income residents, I think that it should be modified because they can't afford that. That is a very, very high tax rate for them. So I think that we should work together to modify that particular rate for our low income residents.
Okay, let's have a good round of applause for our Ward 6 candidates. Thank you very much. Our next panel will be the at-large candidates. We invite you to please come forward at this time so that we can proceed. We received notice this afternoon that Ms. Bonds is going to be delayed. We'll try to be here at some point during the program, but we're going to proceed in any event without her. What am I going to do? Okay, the first question, for which you will be allowed 1 minute. Over the coming years, the District of Columbia will have several infrastructure improvement projects that will create hundreds of new jobs. The Frederick Douglass Memorial Bridge and the streetcar project, to be specific. What steps will you take to ensure DC residents are prepared to take on these jobs and that first source and DC hiring requirements are met? 1 minute, beginning with Mr. Leonard Fleming.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening. Well, basically, what
I'm sorry. Excuse me. I have to step back a minute. We need to have opening statements first, and so I'll read that question again in a minute. But each candidate will have 1 minute to make an opening statement.
Beginning with me?
Yes, beginning with you.
Good evening, everybody.
My name is Nate Bennett Fleming. I'm the United States Representative for DC. And essentially, I was born in the mid-'80s to a single-parent household, and because of the educational opportunity provided in the city, I was able to go on to Morehouse College, study law school at Berkeley, and study government at Harvard. And essentially, I believe those who receive opportunity have a responsibility to come back and provide opportunities for others. And that's why I got involved with public service. My vision for the city is a city that works for everybody. And what does that mean to me? One, people have to be able to afford to live in the city. Two, we have an education system built around connecting our people to high education. And three, an economy built around high-paying jobs and entrepreneurship. So I believe that we need to have leaders that first understand the ability and the needs for a collective vision, but also have the skill set to actually create the legislation to bring us there. I have 14 years of legislative experience, beginning with Congresswoman Norton, working on the DC Council, working on Capitol Hill, and currently I'm an adjunct law professor at UDC. Every city, there comes a moment where you can leverage that moment to take the city on a new trajectory, to build a city where everyone can achieve their potential no matter where they start. And that's my vision for the District of Columbia. I look forward to talking to you more about how I plan to achieve that. Thank you so much.
Mr. Rubio.
Rubio.
Yes.
Hi, thank you for having me. You see, my story starts with a woman that came to DC. She received below minimum wage. She worked long hours without paid sick leave. And her children went to schools ranked last in the city. Her neighborhood offered no parks, and her schools offered no after-school programs. But she worked hard so her son could go to college and graduate. See, my passion for serving starts from my family history and is based on my Christian faith. See, if there's parents who can't find a good quality neighborhood school, then that concerns me. If there's a child east of Anacostia River that can't read, then that matters to me, even if it's not my child. If there's an undocumented worker who's being exploited by his employer, then he shouldn't fight alone. If there's a restaurant server who's making $2.77, then that diminishes the American dream. If CSX wants to come to Ward 6 and build a bigger tunnel, then it should be one city saying no. Thank you.
Mr. Settles?
Good evening. I want to thank all of you all for coming out. My name is John Settles, and I'm running for the at-large city council because I have an at-large commitment. I've lived in almost every ward in the city. I've worked in every ward of the city, and I believe you're either part of the problem or part of the solution. Throughout my 20-year career, I've worked on the issue of affordable housing. I have 3 kids in the public schools. I'm on the LSAT in the kids' current school and have been in all the other schools that they've been in, active in the PTA and the LSAT. And so I've worked on the key issues in the city, whether it's affordable housing, small business development, education. And I see that we're on the brink of success in one area, but we're on the brink of continued major issues in other areas. And so I want to bring my experience to the council so that we can finally get to bringing substantive solutions to these issues that have plagued us for so long, and that we can become the great model city that we should be. So I thank you for being here tonight, and I look forward to speaking with each and every one of you tonight and over the course of the campaign.
And Mr. Valentine?
Good evening, everyone. I'm Kevin Valentine, Jr. It's good to see you all out here looking all beautiful. I'm running for DC City Council. I've got a history of service, particularly grassroots movements, from the orphanages of Kenya and Uganda, where I did grassroots movements to help out orphans and widows, to the streets of Buenos Aires, Argentina, where I worked with a magazine called Echo in Buenos Aires, which had to focus on alleviating the homelessness issue of the city of Buenos Aires, gave people skills and trades that they can learn, and then have an income to get off of the system, if you will. I've also served and am still currently serving in the DC Army National Guard, where I've had a great opportunity to serve my country and my state and my community in ways that have challenged me to get to know myself, what I stand for, what I believe, and incorporate all of these great things into DC politics. So thank you all very much. Look forward to meeting and speaking with you all.
We have one additional surprise guest tonight. I'll allow her to introduce herself for 1 minute.
My name is G. Lee.
You need the microphone.
My name is G. Lee Aiken. I ran 2 years ago in a contested primary for at-large. I'm running again in a contested primary for at-large, but unfortunately, DC for Democracy didn't really want to have anybody but Democrats at this event tonight. I was not here earlier. I didn't know whether the argument had been solved or not. If people don't want me to continue to be up here, I will gladly sit down when my minute is up. I've been here in the city for 50 years. I've fought with DCRA and won. I've fought with OTR and won. I fought with motor vehicles and won. I fought with special education and won. And I am a fighter, which is one reason why I'm here in front of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Shall I stay or shall I go?
It is our intention that you should stay. Let me just say, we are going to be hard-pressed to cover the same territory that we had planned to. We will have to cut back on some of the questions. But those who are here, taking the trouble to come, will include. Okay? So the first question, again, is, over the coming years, District of Columbia will have several infrastructure improvement projects that will create hundreds of new jobs. The Frederick Douglass Memorial Bridge and the streetcar project, to be specific. What steps will you take to ensure DC residents are prepared to take on these jobs and that first source and DC hiring requirements are met? We'll start with Mr. Bennett Fleming and go down the table, okay?
Well, currently the city doesn't get a good return on investment for public subsidies. And that's something that we have to change. That's part of the reason why we spend more money per pupil on education, but we don't have the educational outcomes that's reflective of our investment. Too often, special interests get the better end of the deal, and the taxpayers get caught footing the bill. So what I propose to implement is a reporting mechanism for anyone that gets a public subsidy. So they'll have to report back on the jobs and affordable housing created. So in these increasing infrastructure expenditures, we have to make sure that our developers actually report. And if they fail to report, then simply like we have auditors to make sure that there's enforcement in other areas, we need to have auditors to make sure that the taxpayers are getting the best for their dollars. But increasingly, I don't want to just keep on building the infrastructure that gets people around the city. I want to build infrastructure to get people to where they need to go in their lives. And for me, that means affordable housing, education, and an economy built around high-paying jobs, innovation, and entrepreneurship. And I have plans on my website to create that type of economy. Thank you so much.
Leah? Yes.
All right. You bring up the business of infrastructure and housing. A couple of years ago when I ran, I stated I would be willing to look at the taller buildings idea. Having attended a few hearings, I have serious doubts about that because as a family with an architect, I was thinking in a few clusters where we might have 35, 40-story buildings that would include the right mix of housing, 20 or 30% very low-income housing, another 10 or 15% low housing, a middle third or half of middle-income housing, and a few high-income housing, and stores and restaurants that would feed that and reduce the need for people to have to travel 10 miles to come to jobs in DC. Secondly, I think reporting is very, very necessary. I served for 4 years on the mayor's task force for street vending, trying to save jobs for very small workers, and we tried for years to get a statement from the city as to how much money had actually been paid by vendors, since many of them were paying in cash. This is wrong.
Time is up. Mr. Rubio?
So for a living, I write federal government contracts for the Department of Defense. I've written contracts for National Park Services to rehabilitate national parks throughout the USA. When we issue out these contracts, we issue out terms and conditions that requires the contractor to hire within the city limits. And I think when we build projects here in DC, we should make these contracts so that they're hiring city residents and they're also training city residents and also training kids in high school. See, I believe not everybody goes to college. My brother didn't go to college and he went to a test school and he did really good for himself. But so if we're able to train kids at a high school level for these jobs that are coming, then the unemployment rate will be a lot lower.
Mr. Settles?
So I believe the question is, how do we ensure that residents are prepared in getting the jobs in large infrastructure projects? So I think there's a multifaceted approach. I think first of all, we have to expand and really effectively target our workforce development programs. We've got to increase the skills of our workers so they can meet the jobs. And it's not just the construction jobs, but on large projects like this, you have everything from engineering to design to inspection work, and we need to make sure that we're expanding the vocational training in schools, so kids are graduating prepared, like my uncle who graduated from Phelps in the 50s and was ready to subdivide the neighborhood of Tantallon in Maryland. But then we also have to make sure that we have continuing education and workforce development, so we're continuing to update the skills. And then we also have to have programs for ex-offenders and others who are coming out so that they can transition into these jobs. The second half of the answer is we need to have stricter enforcement. We have First Source and other laws, but they're loosely enforced. So the contractors and others who are doing this work are not following the rules. And unless we have strict enforcement, the rules are going to continue to be broken, and we're going to continue to have not enough DC workers who are getting the jobs and not enough DC subcontractors who are getting the contracts, and we're keeping that money in the community.
Thank you. Mr. Valentine.
Wow. Mr. Settles answered that very well. I'm going to try to beat that. But I agree with a bunch of what he said. But one of the key things we really have to do is kind of destigmatize the idea of vocational education. We see a lot of times nowadays that it has a stigma, oh, you couldn't cut the mustard to go to college, right? That's kind of the agreement behind that socially. But we have to remove that stigma and say, hey, it's about being employed, it's about having a career where you can not only construct things like you said, but they're engineering, they're more professional careers that are waiting to be had by DC residents, but we have to provide the opportunity for them to get the training. It starts in the schools, returning the emphasis in vocational education in our high schools, having partner programs to continue training afterwards, and then Mr. Sellers said it again, protecting citizens by law so that we have to employ DC residents. When you make it through your high school, you get your apprenticeship, or you go to your vocational education training, you increase your training and skills, you guaranteed a job.
Mr. Puryear, would you introduce yourself to the audience first?
I will introduce myself. My name is Eugene Puryear. I'm running at large as a DC Statehood Green. I apologize for how I'm dressed. I wasn't 100% expecting to be up here this evening. I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to be running this campaign. We're trying to run a campaign that's a movement campaign that's for working people in this city, for the oppressed, the exploited, and the excluded, the people who don't have a voice on the council, the people who the federal city council, for the Washington Board of Trade, all those people whose voices aren't heard. Everyone else is heard. We want to be for the oppressed and the excluded. And let me speak directly to this question because I don't want to take up a lot of time. I agree with a lot of what's been said up here. I think we need to look explicitly at tax clawbacks. We know a lot of these companies that are employing people, they're getting significant tax breaks. If they're not employing DC residents, if they're not going with the First Source law, we need to look at getting rid of these tax breaks, bringing them back, clawing them back. Secondly, we think we need to focus very aggressively on ban the box. We know that part of the issue isn't just that people aren't getting hired because they aren't trained. They're getting hired because they're being discriminated against for being returning citizens in this city. And I think we need to look very closely at that issue. And when I say ban the box, I don't just mean, you don't have to ask them in the first round, but you can ask them in the second round of an interview. I mean, the point is they say you went to jail, you served your time. That's the punishment. So when you come back, you shouldn't be continually discriminating issue when we look at
time's up on that
employed.
one. But you can remain standing because I'm going to...
Come back to me.
I want you to begin the next question, answering the next question. We'll start at your end and we'll move this way this time. It's a repetition question again. What do you believe the top individual income tax rate should be? And at what income level should it begin?
Well, I think it certainly needs to be higher. I think it could be as high as 10%. I know a lot of people here want to keep it where it is, but we know that those in the tax bracket have something like $3 billion, I believe, in taxable income that exists. I think that we should be willing to tax the rich more in this city. People say it's going to drive people out. DC is one of the hottest cities in America. People with a lot of money are moving in, and I think there's very little evidence to really show that raising people's taxes is kicking them out of the city. That's not really, I think it's more of a boogeyman than a real issue. I think it should be maybe at least 10. I think it could even go higher than that, to be frank with you. I think we need to look at the massive amount of income that's being created. It's not like it just falls out of the sky. It's created by working people on an everyday basis, and I certainly think that they should be willing to pay back into city service and infrastructure to the level that we need. I think we need to focus on people's needs, not keeping money in rich people's pockets. Thank you.
Mr. Valentine. Let's hold your applause, please. Mr. Valentine.
Well, again, another great answer. It's kind of tough to follow these, but I think I will cap the tax rate at 9%. That's something I'm definitely willing to hear more about going forward. But the key issue is not necessarily the cap tax rate to me. It is the standard deduction. It is making sure that we implement a tax system to benefit all who are a part of it. So if you're making less money, you can afford a little less than someone making a lot more money than you to contribute to the city, right? I think everyone generally agrees with that. Everyone can see the merit in that system. So again, that is the route that I think I would definitely back, the standard deduction. Thank you.
Okay. Settles?
Well, first let me say, I think the Tax Revision Commission got it right on the top rate, and I think they got it right on the bottom rate, so I agree with both of those. The only thing I'd like to see changed is they left the category from 60,000 to 200,000, and I think we need to add a tier there of those from 60,000 to 100,000, because this is a very expensive city if you're in that bracket. And I'd like to see that rate lowered somewhere in the 7% or even lower than that range, so that we're giving tax relief to those singles and also middle-class families that are struggling at that price range. I also would like to see, in addition to the tax cuts, some pre-tax expenses for transportation. Because in my work on the Southeast Children's Fund Board, I see too many single-family households that are being crippled by the transportation costs. We talk a lot about affordable housing, but transportation costs is huge impact on families. There's families catching the bus to the train, and then the bus to the train back home, and they're spending $12 to $15 a day. So we've got to do something about that. So I think we need to have some pre-tax expenses for that. So that
Time is up. Mr. Rubio?
Well, I also agree. I like the revisions that they did. It started at 4%. It goes up to, I believe, 8.5% for anybody making under 350,000. I would want to reduce it down to 250,000. So if you make anything from 250,000 and up, I would want you to be taxed at 9%. And also from 10,000 under, be taxed at 2%. I also want to increase the standard deduction tax credit, which right now tax credit than the federal deduction, and I also want to increase the earned income tax credit, which is also lower than the federal income tax credit, especially for single individuals.
Ms. Aiken?
Yes, the issue of the tax maximum in this city is tied in with a number of other very important issues. The deductions and exemptions were one of the things that the Tax Revision Commission decided they were going to follow, as I had been fighting for the last 10 years to have done in this city. What this means, if we get back the federal rate, which we had in 1973, a family of 4 will not pay taxes until they have income above $27,000. A family of 4 currently has to pay taxes when they're a little over $10,000. So we really need to get that benefit, which will put $85 million back in everybody's pocket. Now, there is an effort to try to spend $3 billion to put lines under the street in the neighborhoods where there are trees, which is generally where the high-priced houses are. We have to be very careful that we don't lose that deduction with this and adjustments at the top.
Time is up.
Compensate.
Mr. Bennett Fleming?
Yes. So one thing, DC taxpayers get less for their tax dollar than any other taxpayer in the country. And I'm surprised that none of the other candidates mentioned that the District of Columbia has something called a structural deficit. So what that means is that our taxpayers pay more taxes than the national average, but that's not enough money to provide for our average level of city services. So one of the reasons why we get less for our tax dollars is because we're not a state. An additional $2.3 billion would be brought into our economy if we were a state, because that would be a payment in lieu of taxes, because a third of the land here in DC is untaxable. To answer the question, I think the highest tax bracket should be between 9% and 10%, and I also believe that we need to find a way to address the commuter taxes. 60% of the people that work in this city do not live in this city. So that ends up, they use city services that they do not pay for. So we have to figure out ways to make sure that we can get that tax burden brought out, and then we have to make sure that we're not a regressive city. Too often, people that make $45,000 pay the same taxes as people that make $200,000, and that's something that we have to change in this city.
Time's up.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Third question. This is a 2-minute question. So you have 2 minutes to answer this. Yeah, but don't feel like you have to take it all. The electoral system in D.C. allows candidates to be elected to office with far less than a majority of the votes. Would you support some type of runoff, as many jurisdictions use to address this problem? If so, what mechanism do you favor? And if not, why not? Let's start in the middle with Mr. Settles and go down and we'll come back. Okay?
Thank you. So, yes, I do believe that we should be electing candidates based on a plurality. So if we have a large number of candidates running, right now the way the system works, a candidate can get the majority, and that can be as low as 20-25%. So I do think that we need to have a system where there are runoffs, and I'd like to see an open system where it's not just Democrats in the initial primary, but it's all the other parties, because I do think that there not only needs to be a plurality, but there needs to be more fairness so that Republicans and independents are all running together in the first primary, and the general is a runoff between the top candidates.
Yes, Mr. Allen.
I would agree that there is D.C. in the electoral process has become so much of a one-party city. We see a lot more independents in the city now, and of course we still have Republicans. So the primary is essentially in D.C. the general election, and the primary is pretty much all Democratic. So if you're not a part of those if you're not a part of the Democratic Party here in D.C., for all intents and purposes, we do have, reserved positions on the D.C. Council for non-dominant parties, but for all intents and purposes, your voice isn't really heard. So we really need to open up, like Mr. Sutter said, the primary, and make sure that it is not primarily focused on one party. We're a city that's going through a bunch of changes, and it's not healthy for the city. But one thing I just wanted to mention is that a lot of these issues are issues that people are aware of, and there's no shortage of awareness of the issues. No one on this panel, no one on the council or anything, but it's all about the will to act, right? This is all about getting people elected in the office that care enough to actually act on the issues. We all know it. We've got degrees. We've got law professors, all that good stuff. This is beautiful. But it takes someone who really cares to make sure that that independent or that Republican who may not be a part of the Democratic Party still has a strong voice in local politics. And again, I don't know if you'll get to it later, I will even open that electoral process open to non-documented citizens here in DC, because if you live here, you pay taxes here, you work here, you ought to have a voice in politics, particularly in the primary. A lot of times we need to, we focus on general election, even primaries do not get that much voter turnout, but in a city where the primary is so monumental, we have to make sure that the primary is open up to all parties. Thank you very much.
Mr. Poirier?
Well, I'll just say briefly, I am for instant runoff or some sort of ranked choice voting system. I think that the issue of a general primary, I don't favor that. We see that right now in California, and what it really does is it excludes the smaller parties, because the two major parties, regardless of how it seems more democratic, well, the two top vote getters, they'll get in there. People who have more money, who have more visibility, are able to then use that as leverage to win in the elections. I think the real issue with democracy and elections is getting big money out of politics. I think we need to ban corporate donations. I think we need to cap the things lower, because the reality of it is when the big developers and the people with a lot of money can just pour cash into your campaign, it doesn't really matter what party ID you have after your name, you're going to be able to get out there more, and it's not going to be about ideas, because people aren't going to have the same opportunity to get in the arena at the same level. So I think really, while I do favor instant runoff voting, ranked choice voting, I do think it's important that if we're talking about how to create more democracy in our electoral system, we really focus on getting big money out of politics and banning corporate donations in politics.
Mr. Bennett Fleming.
Yes, so I'm in favor of a runoff system, and I agree. At the end of the heart of the matter is clean elections. I'm for public financing of election. I believe that the public's trust shouldn't be surrendered to any special interest. And that's what we have right now in the District of Columbia. We have too many special interests that dominate the system, and we need to, first of all, stamp that out. And the first way that we stamp that out is we cannot elect leadership that is invested with the status quo. We cannot elect leadership that is connected with the special interest. So the current council member, the person whose seat that we're running for, was the director of corporate relations for many years for Fort Meyer Construction, which is the #1 city contractor as it relates to pavement. So that's part of the problem in this city. We continue to elect people that are tied up with the political establishment, and the taxpayers do not get the value, and they don't get the return on the investment for their tax dollars. So that's something that we need to change. Another thing that I want to do is get voters more participant in the government right now. There are a lot of tools that exist right now in terms of open government, in terms of transparency. Every contract that the city undertakes should be on the internet for public inspection prior to the contract being implemented. Every city decision should be open for people to participate, and there are new tools that we can implement to do those things. And then finally, we have had a city government that continues to ignore the will of the people. Who in here voted for the Attorney General referendum, the Attorney General initiative? It passed with about 80%, so most people voted for that. And the Council of the District of Columbia overturned the voters' will and delayed the implementation of that referendum. And that's something that we need to change. If elected to the council, one of the first pieces of legislation that I will introduce will be legislation that restricts the ability of the council to overturn the voters' will. Right now, the special interests are the people that are getting the best response out of the Wilson Building. If you elect Nate Bennett Fleming to the council, the people will be getting the best response from the Wilson Building. Thank you so much.
Ms. Aiken.
Several very interesting points have been brought out. I started to say before something about the $3 billion that Pepco wants to spend on tearing up our streets and putting lines underground. I suspect that Fort Meyer Construction will get a lot of that money. The fact that it may be one of the reasons that the council unanimously agreed to this expenditure, which will be paid in part for by the district, and I don't know what that amount is, but a lot of it will be paid by the ratepayers. Every single one of you who pays an electric bill will help pay that $3 billion construction job. So be very careful who you vote for. With regard to instant runoff or other mechanisms, I think one of the advantages to instant runoff is that it happens once and you don't have to pay for it twice. We've already had 3 major elections in the last 3 years because of misfeasance and malfeasance, and each one of those cost almost $1 million. So let's try to do it efficiently. But let's get the big money out of politics. And also, I think having the vote of the primary the 1st of April is not the greatest idea. I think we really ought to go into something like May or June, because trying to collect all the signatures and everything you need to be able to run a proper campaign is just really hard to do during Thanksgiving and Christmas, and then trying to run a campaign in the middle of winter. It just does not really give you people a chance to get to meet the candidates, to get to know what they are for, and to really understand why they should be in favor of them. So at any rate, I hope you will like me and that you will vote for me as the second candidate, or the second at-large member of the City Council, because I will watch what happens to your money.
Okay, Mr. Rubio.
Hi. I agree with an instant runoff with a ranking system that you have to win over 51%. If that was the case in the special election, Anita Bonds probably wouldn't have won. So, because I believe there were other great candidates there, and it's one of the reasons why I'm running. Another thing that they touched on was allowing permanent residents to vote in local elections. We live in a city that we have license plates that say taxation without representation. Well, permanent residents, they're not undocumented. They pay taxes just like you. They live here, they're here legally, and they should have the right to vote. So I would propose a bill that allows permanent residents to vote in local elections.
Okay, Ms. Anita Bonds has arrived, and so we now have a panel of 7 candidates for the at-large position. I'm going to skip over a question. I know we're not going to be able to do all of them, and get to something that I think may be of most interest. It's indicated to be a 2-minute question, but I'm going to make it a 1-minute question just because we don't have a hell of a lot of time. Thank you. Racial disparities in arrests and convictions for marijuana possession in D.C. are well known. Efforts to decriminalize or legalize marijuana are underway in multiple states today. What are your views on these two policy options? Let me think where we begin with this. Ms. Bonds, you are here and fresh. Would you mind taking that first?
Try my very best, and good evening to everyone. If I understand the two-part question, you are interested in my views about decriminalization?
And or legalization, right?
And legalization, I thought. I am one of the members of the council that is very supportive of decriminalization of the marijuana laws in the District of Columbia now. I think it is very discriminative towards particularly persons of color. Most of you probably are aware of what recent data says. And also, I would like to speak on the issue of legalization. I'm not quite there yet, but I am open to the continuous arguments that are put forth as it relates to legalizing marijuana.
Mr. Bennett Fleming.
Well, we all know, I grew up in Southeast DC, so I've had a lot of friends that have had their opportunities diminished for small crimes. So I'm certainly for decriminalization, and I have an eye towards legalization. But the difference in this election isn't about, how we diagnose the problems. The difference is about who actually has the skill set to go and implement the solutions to the problems. And I'm that candidate. I have a legal background, I have a policy background. I'm actually an elected official. I work for statehood right now as a shadow representative. I got 73 new co-sponsors on the bill, working with the people in this room. So I think it's important not just to look for candidates that can tell you what the problem is, but candidates that have solutions to specifically deal with those problems. So one thing that we have to do, so many people in DC have barriers to employment, either educational attainment or the criminal justice system. I'm for banning the box, but another thing we have to do is lower the threshold for expungement in DC. You cannot expunge felonies and you cannot expunge a lot of crimes in the District of Columbia. And that inhibits our returning citizens' ability to acquire employment after they leave the criminal justice system. We need to do smart solutions like that. Thank you so much.
Ms. Aiken?
I must agree with Mr. Bennett Fleming. I'm absolutely for changing our laws so that we can expunge records for minor crimes. One of the signature issues of our party is helping returned citizens, which is a nice way of saying former prisoners. And everybody who goes for a typical job, they have something called the box. They have to check the box if they've ever had any kind of a criminal encounter with the police or with the incarceration system. There's no reason why, because somebody smoked a few joints or sold an ounce of pot, that they should have their whole life destroyed because they made a small mistake. The number of returned citizens in this city is an appalling 60,000 people. If you consider how many family members they have, it probably directly affects 200,000 people.
Time.
Help those people, please.
Mr. Rubio.
So I'm a former at-risk student myself. I grew up in DC, and one of my biggest passions is mentoring and tutoring kids who are at risk. And one of the biggest things that they get in trouble for is possession of marijuana. And what I learned and what research has learned is that once a kid gets stuck in the criminal system, it's kind of a cycle, and it's hard for them to get out of it. And if we decriminalize marijuana, we'll be able to find them, and they won't feel like they're damaged goods. They will feel like they will still feel confidence about themselves and be able to go to college and make something of themselves. Thank you.
Let me first say I'm definitely for decriminalization. I think it's a moral and ethical imperative. I think we're locking up and incarcerating and destroying the lives of too many young people, but we're also wasting too much money. But the other piece that I want to talk about that I don't hear people talking about is the education component of it. Because I think we really need to make a strong move to let our young people know the consequences. Because we can lower the fine and keep them out of jail, But one of the things that's causing our unemployment rate is the number of young people that can't pass the drug test to get the job. And so I think we have to couple the education with the decriminalization so they understand the impact that it's having on their future. Because if they can't pass the drug test, no matter how much we train and empower them, there's going to be a lot of jobs that they're not eligible for. So I think there's a moral imperative right now to address this, because if we look at wards 5, 7, and 8, where we have a 15, a 22, and a 26% unemployment rate, we've got to do something. And we've got a group of young people that are not employable right now because of this issue.
Thank you, Mr. Settles.
Like many of the other candidates here, I'm all for decriminalizing the use of marijuana for recreational purposes. Again, it is an issue of morals, like a lot of people have reflected here, but it's also an issue of making sure that laws, when they are broken, which this law is clearly being enforced in a broken way, as statistics have shown, that we do something about it. That we don't just sit back and see that people who use a drug at the same rate are incarcerated and at rates that don't match up with the usage. So it's more about the will to act again, and I just want to focus on that because we've got people who are very informed and knowledgeable about the issues, and we've got people who have skill sets out of this world to take care of these issues. But it's all about getting people into elected office who care enough to act on these issues. And that's one place where I have to disagree with Mr. Fleming's. You know, it's not about a skill set. It's about people who care enough. Thank you very much.
Yes, I'll be the one. You know, if you look at our 10-point program on our website, at the literature we're handing out, we say legalize marijuana and end the drug war now. The drug war is one of the most destructive policies in this country. It's created a black market that's, you know, got the murder rate skyrocketing. And in fact, the criminalization of marijuana isn't even down, it doesn't even comport with science. I mean, if you smoke a joint on Martin Luther King Jr. Avenue, which is right by where I live, you go to jail. But if you're out getting drunk on 8th Street, then you're one of our valued new residents, and we'll do whatever we can to make life better for you. I think what we need to do is legalize marijuana. We need to end the entire drug war. And I do agree with Mr. Fleming. Not only do we need to lower the threshold for expungement, we need to put more resources towards explaining to people what crimes are expungible, because a huge number of people who are eligible for expungement are actually not taking advantage of that. I believe we need to ban the box all the way. If they say, okay, I went to jail for 5 years, now I'm out of jail, it's over. If you say for any reason I have to tell you I was in jail, you might as well keep me in prison for the rest of my life, because that's all it's doing. We need to eliminate the threshold for people who are returning citizens. They cannot be discriminated against in any way. Thank you.
Time's up. Okay. In order to stay on schedule, I think we have time for just one more question. And listen carefully. Given the strong economic and population growth in recent years, we can all agree that this city is now a hot place to live and work. Going forward, what criteria should justify the use of DC taxpayer funds for further economic development? We'll start with Mr. Rubio and come this direction, and then we'll go to the end and come back. Mr. Settles will have the last word, I guess, on this.
What would justify the use of our tax dollars is the benefit of the community. Your voice, not the corporation. Too many times, DC politics, council members, they focus on getting money from businesses they used to work for, or businesses that were donated to their campaign, and not focus on what the people are thinking. There's a situation right now in Ward 6 where CSX wants to build a larger terminal for their corporate use, but it affects the community. And we need to band together and fight together so we can make sure that big corporations don't come into DC and try to take over and not listen to what the people have to say. Thank you.
Ms. Aiken.
There's so much that could be said about so many different issues in the city, and I don't know whether I necessarily want to answer this particular question. All I can say is things are changing in the city. We are a very popular destination. We have 70% of the people coming into town working from outside of town. And one specific thing that was proposed by the Tax Revision Commission was to have all employers, or at least most employers, pay $25 a quarter for their employees to help pay for the infrastructure that supports them. I think that should be altered slightly. I think that they should pay a higher rate for out-of-the-city employees, maybe $40 or $50, and only pay $10 or $15 for DC employees, DC resident employees. I think this would help redress the balance on that. And one other thing, when you turn 21, you don't have to ask the city to allow you to be a voter. So let's keep expungement automatic, not begged for.
Mr. Perry Fleming?
Well, despite the fact that our city is growing, we have the highest income inequality in the nation. So my answer to the question is that we have to use economic development to change that. One, we need to bring in jobs that are diverse and jobs that have high paying across the demographics, across skill sets. And in terms of bringing in new jobs, I believe that we should offer tax credits when people bring in jobs that offer retraining. People offer jobs that for workforce opportunities in distressed areas. And if there's a company that brings in 300 net new jobs to the city, I think we should promote that with a tax credit. But the alternative is that we have to have strong reporting and enforcement mechanisms to make sure that DC taxpayers are getting the jobs out of those deals. Right now, we're selling off properties to Donatelli Development for $10. And part of the reason is that our current leadership is too entangled with special interests. So that's why we have to elect new leadership. And the difference in this election is that we have an incumbent and we have to elect the strongest challenger. Nate Bennett Fleming is that strongest challenger, and I want your vote on April 1st. Thank you so much.
Ms. Bonds?
Thank you very much. When we talk about economic development, we always start with the equation of what happens in an individual's home and in their life, and that is a job. Job inequality certainly is rampant in the District of Columbia, but it's not so much because of what the government does, it's what the marketplace has put before us. And one of the things that we really need to work on is how do we fill the 300,000 jobs that we have in the District of Columbia with District of Columbia residents. And that means that we have to have training that points to existing jobs. That's number one. Also, we want to continue to bring into the District of Columbia new opportunities for jobs, for economic development and stimulus, and that also leads us to making sure that we have obtainable, affordable housing, because that too is a part of the equation. There are many other things that I have to stop with. Thank you.
Mr. Courier?
Well, if the question is under what circumstances should the city use its tax dollars to bring business in, I would say there are no circumstances. I mean, the fact of the matter is this is one of the hottest cities. The jobs are coming regardless, and all across this country right now, there's corporate blackmail going on. And these big corporations, they go to every city and they say, well, if you don't do what we want, we'll go here. If you don't do what we say DC, we'll go to Virginia. If you don't do what we want Seattle, we'll go to South Carolina. And the fact of the matter is someone has to stand up. It's a moral imperative that we fight this race to the bottom where all these corporations are running around, taking our money and not giving back commensurate benefits. They're giving low-paying jobs. What we need to focus on is not giving money away from corporations, but getting money back from corporations. We give them their money. We work for them. We're the ones who buy their goods. They need to pay higher wages. A $15 an hour minimum wage, I think, is the bottom floor. They need to treat workers correctly. We need to end wage theft. We need to allow the ability to unionize. Let's stop giving away our resources to corporations. Let's stop agreeing with this corporate blackmail that's going on all across the country and all across the world, really, and let's stand up and say DC is a moral city where workers' rights come before corporate personhood.
Okay. Mr. Valentine.
Another beautiful answer. I think he hit it right on the head when it's tough to follow that up. But the point that economic development is happening in DC because we are DC. Mind you do have economic cycles, booms and busts and all of that good stuff. But we're DC. The jobs are going to be here. The focus should be less on the economic development as far as the taxpayers' money, and it should be making sure the taxpayers' money are going, again, to continue training advanced training for individuals, and making sure that people are able to get jobs, not only get the jobs, but again, get the jobs where they're able to earn a livable wage and have benefits. For instance, the food services industry, you've got a minimum wage, but even more than that minimum wage increase, you need to have leave, sick leave. You know, if you don't show up to work and you're a waitress, you don't get paid. You know, what if you're sick? You can't be around food if you're sick. That's a problem. So we need to fix that. Next.
Let me answer the question. So the question is, when and how should we use taxpayer dollars for future as it relates to economic growth? So the first area we need to
which could not be touched in our fund balance to having now over $1.5 billion, and you will see in a couple of days it will increase. We said we were going to improve education. We have looked at the test scores that we got for our kids back in December as well as November, and we have the most robust early childhood education program in America. We said we were going to improve unemployment. We just got new rates yesterday. We've got 8.1% unemployment rate. Development is rapidly improving. Affordable housing we've invested in, and we have improved this city. Everybody, I think, including those to my left, the city is better off today than it was 3 years ago. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Lewis?
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to be here in front of you this evening. You know, what I view the question is, you know, are we really satisfied with where we are right now? And if we're not, and you have to answer that question. And the satisfaction comes in is that are we working together to make this a city to work for everyone? Or is this a city that is still allowing us to work in silos and not really be the open and transparent city that we all deserve? You know, I'm prepared as your next mayor to work with all of you, to work with our citizens who have the greatest needs and put where the greatest resources that we have. You're gonna hear a lot tonight, but I know we have a challenge. And that greatest challenge for me is, as I traveled throughout the world, working in the Obama administration, it became very clear to me that the DC that people talked about was a federal city. It was not the city of the neighbors and the friends that we see in and around this room. And the DC that they talked about was one which does not work for everyone.
Thank you. Mr. Orange.
Well, good evening, DC for Democracy. My name is Vincent Orange, and I came here tonight to ask you for your vote on April 1st for Mayor of the District of Columbia. I offer a very reasonable, balanced, and fair approach to governing the affairs of the nation's capital without taking anyone for granted and without leaving anyone behind. As Mayor of the District of Columbia, I will bring good paying jobs with good wages, access to affordable housing, access to health care, and a great opportunity for everyone to get a good education here in the nation's capital, from preschool through the University of the District of Columbia. We must invest in our public education pipeline, and that pipeline belongs to us, and our children are our future. At the end of the day, we must ensure that all our 3- and 4-year-olds are prepared for kindergarten, and that our kids entering the 4th grade can read independently and can add, subtract, multiply, and divide, so they will have the opportunity to have a good quality of life. Once again, I'm Vincent Orange, I'm running for mayor, and I ask for your vote on April 1st, 2014. Thank you very much.
Mr. Shalal.
Thank you and good evening. My name is Andy Shalal, and I'm running for mayor of the district because I love this city. I've been in this city working and doing business in the city for over 25 years. And I see it becoming really more and more that tale of two cities that we hear in so many cities throughout the country. This is a city of major disparities. It's number one in disparity in wealth, number one in disparity in healthcare. It's number one in disparity in education. I think we can do better. I believe this city can work for everyone. You're going to hear politicians, they'll tell you what they could have, should have, would have done, and they didn't. I'm telling you that I'm bringing a new, fresh leadership and fresh vision to the mayor's office. I am the only one that has created jobs, thousands of jobs, many of them full-time, with sick leave and benefits for all. I'm the only one that's able to bridge the East and the West, the black and the white, all of DC. All of DC needs to come together, and I'm the one that will be able to do it. I can do it through art and culture. I have been proven, and I've done it before, and I can lead and succeed. Andy Shalal, thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Wells.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Tommy Wells, and I'm running to be the next mayor of Washington, D.C. One of the number one reasons that I'm running is to end the culture of corruption in our government. Now, the reason that's important is because we cannot get the things that we want as a city if we have a culture of corruption in our elected government. Affordable housing, that if our campaigns are financed by corporations, when we see city assets, the number one value of that asset is going to be the dollar and not creating affordable housing. What we see with campaign finance reform, the elected city council members, the ones that are running for mayor, have voted against campaign finance reform almost every time. We've got 3 council members that have stepped down for being indicted. We have a mayor that's under investigation for having a campaign that was funded, and that you have to look at what that has meant with Jeffrey Thompson now coming into the news, that event has cost the city $40 million already. That's a lost opportunity for affordable housing, investing in our youth, investing in education.
Time is
That's
up.
why I'm running.
Good. Okay, I'm ready to ask the first question, and I think this will start at the other end of the table with Mr. Wells and work this way. 7 states, including California, Washington, and Alaska, pay tipped workers the same minimum wage as other workers. Would you support D.C. following their example? Why or why not?
Well, we've just been through a long discussion as a city about what fair wages are. And as you know, I helped lead the fight to be sure that we raise the minimum wage for everyone, including our servers and restaurants. So their wages will go up. Now, one of the concerns I have is you go into the restaurants in D.C. and very often the people that are serving you don't look like the people in the back of the house. So we know our servers get minimum wage. We know that they will receive most of the tip wages. They are generally often white and not minority or new immigrants like in the back of the house. But I believe we need to have a discussion like we did with minimum wage to bring parity. I could definitely see that D.C. tipped wages be on parity with Maryland.
This is an issue, obviously, that's near and dear to my heart. I employ a lot of tipped workers, and I long for the day that we won't have to have tipped workers. I don't tip my dentist, I don't tip my doctor, I don't tip my car mechanic. Maybe I should, but I don't. But what I'm saying is that we need to have living wages for everyone. I do support the bill that provides for tip wages to be 70% of the minimum wage, and I think that seems to be a fair compromise at this point. Combined with the tips, I think that exceeds the minimum wage, and I think that seems to be a fair compromise at this point.
Mr. Orange.
Thank you for the question. As you know, I actually authored and introduced the Minimum Wage Act of 2013, which results in a minimum wage of $11.50 by the year 2016, with annual increases pursuant to the Consumer Price Index. I also championed the legislation that now provides our tip wage workers up to 5 days of accrued sick leave with pay at the minimum wage rate. We need to understand what the issue really is. The issue is that tip wage workers are entitled to the minimum wage. If it's $11.50, it doesn't matter if the tip wage is $2.77 because they're entitled to $11.50 per hour. We're going to put into the budget this year more enforcement personnel so we can ensure that all the restaurants are in fact paying the minimum wage. And if we determine the years down the road that does not work, then we will take this issue up again. But it's about the minimum wage. It's not about the $2.77. It's about the $11.50 that they're guaranteed to get.
Ms. Lewis.
Yes, I support an increase in tip wages, but it has to be done in concert with that private sector. Because at the end of the day, you know, when I grew up, my parents were entrepreneurs, and they had a drive-in restaurant, and they paid their employees a salary, and they allowed their employees to keep their tip wages. Now, I don't know who in the restaurant business is, who are the employees that are not looking for the tips, because when they go home at night, it is not about the tips. It is whether they made that tip, and if they did not, Will the DC government enforce what has to occur for the private sector to pay them that difference? And right now, what we're finding out in our own government is that we are not in compliance. We do not have enough officers. We do not have enough people who are really making sure that it is predictable. And that's something that would do with leadership.
Thank you. Ms. Gray.
Thank you very much. Yes, I support a fair wage for everyone. I was happy, pleased to be able to support the increase in the minimum wage that was approved by the council. We signed the bill jointly. We're going from $9.50 in July, $10.50 the following July, and $11.50 the following July. We currently also are looking through the Urban Institute at other ways in which we may be able to enhance wages for people who live in the District of Columbia. The reality is that we have an increasing cost of living in the District of Columbia, and we need to make sure that we bring people along who are living in the District of Columbia, otherwise they won't be living in the District of Columbia. I support increasing the minimum wage for people who make tips in the District of Columbia. I support bringing them up to the level that other people who work in the District of Columbia earn. That also means what an affordable city is in the District of Columbia.
Okay. The next question is very much related to the first one. And I think we'll start with Mr. Gray and go down the table as we did before. But I'm going to mix this up more so you'll really be confused in the next time around. Okay. The council passed sick leave for restaurant workers and a citywide increase in the minimum wage. But there are still unscrupulous employers in D.C. who fail to live up to benefits and wage requirements. What will you do to improve enforcement and fight wage theft?
Well, first of all, we are looking now at what the level of enforcement officials is. How many people do we have working in that area? And as we improve wages for people, the challenge will be to be able to ensure we have enough people who will go out into these restaurants and other places of work in the District of Columbia and ensure that people, in fact, are paying the wages that are required. Once we determine whether we have enough officials or not, I intend in this upcoming budget to be able to introduce a request of the council to be able to increase the budget of the Department of Employment Services in order to be able to add additional officials, if in fact we need additional officials, in order to do that work.
You know, it really amazes me that now that we're running for office, that with the combined experience of 68 years of my opponents who have served in elected office, that the citizens of the District of Columbia finally got the raise on minimum wage, finally got the conversation seriously around the living wage and the tip wage. And now we're really talking about, are we going to really enforce the fact that we have been robbing from moms and dads who are just putting in a hard day's work, and all they want to do is be treated with the respect and to be given what they have earned. And if we're going to be a city that works for everyone, it's the leadership that has to be provided. And as your next mayor, I will make sure that the types of individuals that are put in place, who are the executives, who are there to enforce those laws, have the resources that they need. We don't need a study, we need action. And that action comes from being the mayor and to being the one who lays out the plan and the program that says, give the people what they deserve and not be robbing from moms and dads.
Thank you. Ms. Orange.
Well, I'd just like to set the record straight. In 2006, I championed the Living Wage Act, and which established a living wage for $11.75 with annual increases. And just recently, it was increased to $13.40. This is the living wage when there's at least $100,000 in the government project. I championed, along with Chairman Mendelson, the Living Wage Act for the large retailers, which we passed and the mayor vetoed. And then I authored and introduced the Minimum Wage Act, which brings us to where we are today at $11.50. On February 4th, I will be introducing the Wage Theft Amendment Act to make sure that we address that issue. Now, as it relates to right now, we have provided law that says that there will be self-certification by the restaurants for the first time. There's about 2,500 restaurants here, 800 that we can track. The other 1,700, we have to make sure that they self-certify that they are actually paying the minimum wage, and let's get away from the tip wage.
I was at the forefront, we were at the forefront actually of making sure that people who work in restaurants get sick leave. This was an issue that was really important, and I remember when the City Council first passed the bill, they exempted tipped workers. And I thought that was really interesting how you can exempt tipped workers, who are the people that serve you your food, from having sick leave. That doesn't make any sense. We had implemented that way before they even thought about talking about it. It's been in our place for years. For over 4 years, we've had sick leave for all, not just full-time people, but part-time people, tipped employees, and everyone. On the idea of enforcement, absolutely. We need to hire more people in order to enforce the laws. It's that simple.
Thank you. Mr. Wells?
For those of you that have watched the City Council, either because it's on TV and you want to go to sleep at night, or you just like watching it happen, one of the things you know is that very often the vote on a bill is not the first real vote. The vote on a bill is often something like the vote to table the bill. When we first passed Paid Sick and Safe Leave Act, the real vote on that act was the vote to table. That was the vote to kill the bill. Vince Gray, Jack Evans voted to table indefinitely to kill the bill. Now, the way that we go forward with wage theft and the issues that we have to be sure that our employers do what they're supposed to do is we need a separate Department of Labor where that's solely their job is to enforce the laws of the District of Columbia that you vote for, that we pass, and that you bring to us to be sure that our corporations are held accountable.
Thank you. Okay, the next question is going to allow you 2 minutes to answer, and I think it will be a challenge. Question is, what 2 recommendations from the Tax Revision Commission would you commit to including in your first budget? What 2 recommendations would you want to change, and how? We'll start with Mr. Orange, and I'll call the names when each one is spoken, okay?
Well, as you know, the Tax Commission report will come before the council, I believe, on February 12th, and actually I'm meeting with Mayor Williams, who's the chair of the commission, next week. There's a menu of items that could actually take place with this particular proposal, so I can't give you an exact item that I will go for and that I will be against. But I will say that whatever we do, it should be in the best interest of the citizens of the District of Columbia, that ensures that people will be able to stay in the district and that we are not actually providing relief for those who really don't need relief. Like, you know, taking the real property tax down to 5%, where that actually, you know, addresses folks west of the park and not east of the river. I would look for something that can fund the new communities initiative, the low-income housing that this administration is backing away from, that deals with low-income housing at Berry Farms in Anacostia, at Lincoln Heights over in Deanwood, at Park View and Process in Park View. And these are the things that we need to be looking at. And I will be looking for something that is going to ensure that we are putting the appropriate dollars and resources in our educational system to make sure that our children get the best education they can possibly get here in the District of Columbia, and that we support and invest in our pipeline of education from preschool through the University of the District of Columbia. Right now, there is a movement to eliminate the athletic programs at the University of the District of Columbia. There are 147 student athletes up there that need those scholarships in order to get a good college education there. And they're also talking about eliminating 28 of the baccalaureate programs, and all of this for $16 million over a 5-year period. So in this tax policy that comes before us, I will be looking at a tax policy that supports the citizens of the District of Columbia.
Thank you. Mr. Wells, I'm not staying with the same order. I'm going to jump around, okay? Ms. Wells?
Thank you very much. There's 4 things that I would do with this tax code. One is we need to have a progressive tax code. We're a progressive city, and it needs to be a progressive tax code. One way that we do it is that we keep the upper rate that's set to sunset. And anybody running for office should be asked, are you going to keep the upper rate at about 8.9%? We have to keep that. But the other thing that we need to do is we need to increase the standard deduction so people can keep more of the money they make and spend on themselves and their families. And that will make it more progressive. The other thing is that the tax code or the tax commission is looking at increasing how much you can keep away from the inheritance tax. Now, I do believe that our current inheritance tax rate of how much is exempted is a little low, primarily because houses have gotten so valuable that there is a value to see that homes pass down to the next generation. I would increase the exemption up to $3 million, so kind of split the difference. The other thing that I would do as we're starting to run surpluses, that I believe that our local businesses need a break. We have one of the highest commercial property tax rates in the country, and we need to provide locally owned businesses a break. So how do you do it? It's not lowering the property tax or the commercial property tax, but it's creating something like a Schedule H, where you get a tax credit for the amount of taxes that you pay to property tax through your triple net lease or however you own the property. We could set a business size of gross tax receipts of up to $2.5 million. That way, locally owned businesses that they certainly generate wealth locally, but they also hire local folks, will get the tax break and tax credit and tax favorability so that we can grow more local businesses in D.C.
Thank you. Mr. Gray?
Well, first of all, I'm not prepared at this stage to say exactly which ones we would accept, which ones we would not accept, because I think it's going to take a review process in order to be able to do that. One of the things I think we need to look at is how we continue to finance education in the District of Columbia. We just did an adequacy study that was designed to be able to determine what additional investments we need to make in education in the city. Those things that will continue to keep an adequate pay level for our teachers in the District of Columbia, and will continue to invest in our schools so we can continue the progress that we've been making. One of the things I would support, however, is there's the rate now, the highest rate is 8.95%, and there is nothing in the middle. I would support for those who make $40,000, $50,000 a year, this is one of the things that's actually discussed in the study, I would support a lower rate for those folks in order to make it more palatable for them to be able to live in the District of Columbia. Now, in terms of a commercial tax rate, we need to recognize that we have the lowest residential tax rate in the District of Columbia by comparison to the entire region. We pay 85 cents, the cost is 85 cents per $100 of assessed value, and everybody else in the region is higher than that. I also sponsor legislation, which is in effect at this stage, to be able to lower the commercial tax rate, which is $1.85 per $100 of assessed value. It was lowered on the first $3 million down to $165, and the purpose of that was to be able to support our small businesses in the District of Columbia that we want to preserve in the city. The Tax Commission did a good job of assessing what the tax situation is in the District of Columbia. I actually did legislation that approved an increase in the standard deduction several years ago.
Time is up. Thank you. Ms. Lewis?
The first thing that I would do as the mayor is to make sure that there is transparency and accountability in this process. One of the things that has been very clear as I have traveled across the city and talking with residents is that everything seems to be done in a secret. And no matter whether we had a tax hearing, we should really say how many people showed up at that hearing. And if it was on television, how many people were really viewing that? And it's not that you can't, because at where we are in America right now, we can have access to information by just pressing send. And so if we have authorities that I, as mayor, have the ability to appoint the chair and with consent of the council, I want to make sure that the individuals understand first and foremost that you got to have a transparent process. It's got to be open because I want it to be accountable to the citizens and the residents of the District of Columbia. When you start sitting up here talking about you have a menu of services, how do we even know what the menu is or what the menu of items that are there if we have not had a chance to be able to review what those items are? But what I would want to make sure is that in any investment that what I would want to put forth would have to be primarily in 3 areas. It would have to always be about jobs. We know that with the sequestration that just recently happened, with the budget shutdown, we know we lost a lot of jobs. In the last jobs report, it said that we lost jobs, but the ones that we gained were still in the government sector. We cannot be a Washington, D.C. that is continuing to focus on jobs in the government. And so I want to make sure that we continue to make investments in areas around training and skill development and workforce development. Secondly, yes, we are going to continuously talk about affordable housing. 3 years ago, in a big session, you said housing, affordable housing, was the #1 priority in the District of Columbia because we have a chronic problem. We have to not just put money right now in the trust fund, we have to make a 5-year commitment. And I can make only a 4-year commitment as your next mayor, and I would do that.
Mr. Shalal.
As a small business owner, I do believe that our business franchise tax is one of the highest in the region, and I would recommend to make it more in parity with Maryland and Virginia, probably bring it down to 8.25 to attract small local businesses so that they can continue to grow and thrive and produce more jobs. The other thing is our income taxes. We have a single bracket between $40,000 and $350,000. I think that needs to be changed. I think we can increase the lower bracket to about $60,000 or $80,000, depending on whether you're single, whether you're married. And I would say that we need to increase it to that level and then have another bracket up to $350,000. And I would also make sure that I maintain the tax at the $350,000 when it comes to be sunset in 2016. So I want to be able to maintain that tax forever. So that's the beginning. The other thing that I'd like to be able to see is to be able to have an earned income tax credit for childless families. For a person who does not have a child, they should be able to also get that deduction. The other thing I think that's really important with our tax is our sales tax. Right now it's 5.75. I'd like to increase that to 6, and I think that will also generate a lot of revenues for us. The other thing is I think we have to also consider our rainy day fund, which is now growing immensely. And now we had $1.5 billion and about to go maybe to $2 billion. That's a lot to be able to hold on to. That's over almost 20% of our budget. And when we say rainy day fund, for some people it's really raining and they're drowning. And I think it's time for us to be able to reinvest in our communities so we can have them be stronger. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next question. This is another 1-minute question. To address concerns about the undue influence of those who make large contributions to political campaigns, would you support legislation to prohibit contracts, grants, and tax breaks that might otherwise go to such contributors? Ms. Lewis, would you begin?
You know, part of the work that I've done took me around the world. And as I was out giving a message of making sure that governments would be open and transparent and accountable, I found I would pick up the paper back home and I'd realize that we were not doing that. So would I totally support that? Absolutely. Because we have to end the pay-for-play system that has plagued DC government. We have to make sure that we are accountable to the residents who have voted, to make sure that we have a partner in government as the Attorney General that was supported, that was endorsed by our residents. We have to make sure that we're fully funding our Inspector General offices, because it's going to be those types of partners that we're going to need in order to make sure that we uphold all of our laws and all of our rules and make sure that we do not have undue influence. And so yes, making sure that contractors who are currently who currently have contracts should not be allowed to be contributors.
Thank you. Mr. Gray.
answer that quite succinctly. I introduced legislation that would do exactly that, and it sat dormant in the council. It said that those who are candidates or recipients of large contracts that are being defined as a six-figure number would be unable to make contributions then to candidates, and candidates would be unable to accept those contributions. We included in that legislation a prohibition on money orders, and we included in that legislation a prohibition on bundling, which is a typical process. And frankly, it went nowhere in the council. So I would be happy to renew the legislation that we've already submitted, and would hope that the council this time around would pass it.
Mr. Wells.
This is an issue, and I know that's very important to DC for democracy. We have to figure a way to somehow end a pay-to-play government. That is undoing not just the confidence in our government, but the choices that are made on who gets contracts, who gets tracts of land, who gets to play with DC government. But I'll show you how hard it is. The last time we just had a vote on this, I introduced an amendment that said, how about if you have a contract with DC government and the council votes on it, and you give money to a council member or anyone running for mayor. And you know what? Just to disclose on that contribution, the council members that voted against it, Vincent Orange, Jack Evans, Muriel Bowser, they don't even want you to know that that is a contractor. They're voting on their contract when they fund their campaigns. This is going to be tough, but we can do it together.
Mr. Orange.
Well, I'm not sure I really agree with Councilman Wells, but let's clear the record again. I support legislation that not only bans corporate contributions, but also bans council members for being on their payrolls. I support legislation that bans an entity from doing business with the city that has a council member on their payroll. See, these are little pieces they want to put together. And I said, let's do the whole thing. Let's address it all. Let's also talk about constituent services funds. We got council members buying season tickets to the Nationals and to the Wizards and what have you. So let's ban it all. Let's don't play games. Why would I support legislation to stop corporate contributions, and at the same time I'm sitting next to somebody that's on their payroll? And why would I want to support someone who is on the payrolls of an entity, and I see those contracts go from $30 million up to $150 million, and then that person recuses himself? Who are you kidding?
Thank you.
So let's address all of it. If we're going to do it, let's do it right.
Mr. Shillal.
Now, this is the fundamental issue of democracy, is voting. And I was involved in an initiative back in 1991 called Initiative 41 that limited campaign contributions for citywide races to $100. And guess what? The city council overturned it. I understand the corrosive impact of money on government, on elected officials. We've seen it over and over again. This is a replay, folks. So I will support, and I want to support public financing for campaigns. I think that's the only way you can really run clean campaigns, is through public financing. New York has done it. They've done a great job with it. And I think we have to end this pay-to-play culture that has been so pervasive at the Wilson Building.
Next question, also a one-minute answer. Communities like Phoenix and Salt Lake City are among the first to end chronic homelessness among veterans. Yet our nation's capital still has veterans and many others who have been living on the streets for years with serious illness. What would you do to end chronic homelessness in D.C.? We'll begin with Mr. Shillal.
Yes, many communities have been able to actually almost put an end to homelessness. If you had talked to somebody a while ago, they'd say, oh, it's impossible to end homelessness. It's like gravity. It's part of nature. And it's not. It can actually be end. There's such thing as permanent supportive housing that could be given to people that are chronically homeless, that have issues, for whether they're mental issues or substance abuse issues. We have the money. It's there. we spent $54,000 right now for a family to put them up in DC General. That is unacceptable. That is money that could be much better spent by providing some permanent housing for folks that need it.
Thank you. Mr. Wells.
Well, under the previous administration, I helped champion Housing First. That's where we took the most chronically homeless, those that no one else had been able to help, we got them into housing. And we got in almost 1,000 people into housing that had not been able to get into housing before, and 90% are still there. One of the most successful programs we've ever done on behalf of the homeless. And under this administration, under Vince Gray's administration, this program has not grown hardly one bit. They've gotten some federal dollars on the veterans' money from the federal government, but that has not grown, and we're seeing more homeless on the streets again. I just visited one of the hotels where we've got over 1,400 of our residents are in hotels because we did not prepare. We're running surpluses. DC General has been full for over a year. We knew this was coming. Don't say it's just because it got cold out. It's because this administration failed to plan, prepare, and solve the problem of providing homes for our families.
Ms. Lewis?
You know, I just left the Housing First meeting, and one of the key things that they were emphasizing is that it really has to be done together with all the providers, the private sector. But the most important place that it starts, and they were very supportive of the work that the administration had done, but it's really part of what kept coming up over and over is that where is the plan? Where is the overall strategy? And where is the final commitment that we are following Phoenix and Salt Lake City, and we're here in the nation's capital where they were talking about how people are just walking by the chronic homeless like they're invisible. They are not invisible. They're the men and women that have been, every one of us know someone who has had problems and have had difficulties. And it is incumbent upon us as a community to come together along with leadership. And as the next mayor, I would put forth that kind of plan and that kind of strategy and make sure that we work with our partners together to end homelessness.
Mr. Gray.
Well, first of all, you got people who sit up here and glibly talk about what happened and what they did, and they leave out parts of the story. The fact of the matter is that when we came into office, the budget for homelessness was $95 million, and it included federal funds, which were promptly reduced by the federal government. Not only have we replaced those funds, but the budget now for homelessness in the District of Columbia has gone from $95 million to $120 million, with less federal funds being included. The permanent supportive housing budget has gone from $9.4 million up to $21.4 million. The fact of the matter is, we also, for the first time, have done assessments of everybody who is in the TANF program, and there are people who are in the TANF program who wind up in the homeless families program. We have done the unprecedented, and that is to put $187 million into affordable housing in the District of Columbia, and that is going to improve outcomes for people in the city.
Thank you. Mr. Orange.
The issue here is not the money. Yes, we're going to put $187 million in the Housing Production Trust Fund. The issue is how we spend the money. And that is the issue. The issue is, where is the plan for homeless people? And then once you decide how much you're going to spend on that, then let's spend the money. Now, with $187 million in your Housing Production Trust Fund, that means on the market you can go out and have access to $1 billion. All we have to do is pay the debt service and build the proper facilities and get it done. The same way with the New Communities Initiative. There's 4 initiatives that the administration is backing away from. And this came from the plan, the Economic Resurgence of Washington, D.C., Citizens Plan for Prosperity. That's the plan that has got us to where we are today. And it has generated all this revenue, but now it's time to take that revenue and go back and take care of some of our safety net issues. And that's what this government has moved away from. When we built National Stadium, there was a $450 million community benefit fund. When the money was realized, they took the money and spent it on something else.
Thank you. Okay, next question. Do you support ban-the-box legislation prohibiting private sector employers from asking about criminal convictions on job applications? Why? Why not? We'll begin with Mr. Gray. Yep.
I do support ban the box. I have supported ban the box, and I support it because I think we've got a lot of people who are returning to this city who have had offenses and they paid their debt to society. I don't want to see people judged simply on the basis of a criminal record initially. I want people to have a chance to put their qualifications, their credentials on the table. Now, once they are determined to be qualified for a job, we then, would be able to look at whether whether the job involves the question of people having a criminal record and is somehow interfering with their ability to work. Let me take an example. If there's someone who would be working with children who has a criminal offense involving children, obviously we wouldn't want that. So yes, I banned the box. I have voted for banning the box, and then I would put the criminal record, such as there is one, on the table when the person is being offered a job.
Thank you. Mr. Wells?
My vision for our city is that everyone has an equal opportunity to participate, stay, and fully engage in our city. I've introduced a bill to ban the box, had a long meeting on it today. We're going to make it a good bill, and we're going to pass the bill. We're going to pass it with at least 9 votes. We're going to be sure it's a veto-proof bill. We are going to ban the box in the District of Columbia and give everyone an equal opportunity to get a job. They've paid their debt. We have over 8,000 returning citizens per year, and that is 8,000 people that need an equal opportunity in our great city.
Thank you. Mr. Shalal?
I absolutely support the ban the box legislation in theory and in fact, because that's what we do in our place. When we first started my place, Busboys and Poets, we had a box where people had to check off. We had bought the application from Staples, and it had on it to check off. When we realized how detrimental this issue was, we immediately removed it, and now we don't ask that question. And I think it's really brought us some great people, and we find out later that someone may have been incarcerated or is a returning citizen. The bigger issue here, we have 60,000 returning citizens in this city, and many of them don't have the support they need in order for them to be able to succeed, to get jobs and keep jobs. The problem we have right now is that of the 60,000 returning citizens, when they come back, they're handed directions to a homeless shelter and a bag of goodies. The problem you have is that the Office of Returning Citizens Affairs only has $286,000 in its budget. Now, I know that they can refer people to other things, but we need to have a lot more money to be able to support 10% of our population.
Thank you.
Well, clearly, if you've been following this issue, you would know that Councilmember Marion Barry and I have been out front on this issue for a very long time. And it's amazing how when election season comes up, then everybody wants us to introduce a bill. But this is a bill we fought for, and the council voted it down. And I can also tell you that the Office of Returning Citizens, clearly, with $286,000, really they just have a couple people and pays their benefits, and that's it. I've introduced a bill that would set aside $10 million and create a fund for our returning citizens where they would actually be trained, provide an opportunity to start their own jobs, and things of that nature. We hope that Councilmember Wells will hold a hearing on that bill so we can actually do something real for the returning citizens. Because at the end of the day, you have to have some money on the table so you can be trained and prepared in order to be assimilated back into this community.
Ms. Lewis.
All you have to do is just be out, talking with the residents in the District of Columbia, and when you're asking them for their vote, and then they tell you the heartbreaking story, sometimes very quietly, that they cannot vote, or they're returning. But what they then tell you is that they just are looking for a fair shot. And under my administration, that's what we were giving to those returning citizens. So would I support that? Absolutely. But one of the things is that I know that we have to continue to work with families. We have to work with the moms and the dads, because all the fair shot that they are looking for is to become productive citizens. And in becoming productive citizens, they will need the type of training and skills and vocational workforce development programs that is so sorely needed for those types of individuals who are our own relatives, family, friends, and neighbors. And so all moms and dads want is just to make sure that we treat those individuals with respect and dignity that they deserve.
Thank you very much. Last question, which if we get through, as I think we will keep us right on time for completing what I said we would. This is a 2-minute answer. Kaya Henderson has recently formed a task force to reduce standardized testing in DC public schools. What are your views on the use of standardized tests? Begin that with Mr. Wells.
I think we've gone way too far in standardized testing. That when we measure a school by just its test score, we miss everything else. The most important measure of a school is where does a parent trust to send their child to school. Nobody knows the test scores of Sidwell Friends, but everybody would love to send their children to school with the president's children. Test scores are an audit for parents to see about the choice they made. It should be a tool for the school to see how a child is doing and what they need as you hand that child next to the next teacher. But it is also an evaluation of how the school is doing, but the standardized testing has gone too far. And finally, one of the things that it's done is that it has done nothing to address the fact that what we need, a great city has to have, is an elementary school in walking distance to every child and family in the district. Under this administration, we've been closing schools. We closed another elementary school. We're putting children on buses for the first time in years. That cannot happen because that is a failure. I know we can do it because I've done it in Ward 6. We're adding 3 elementary schools in Ward 6. Families are staying there. And don't say it's gentrification. We have more public housing in Ward 6 than any other ward in the city. It's about working with families, working with parents, and asking them what they want. Now, let me also say, I've done that in concert with Kaya Henderson, with Michelle Rhee, and before that with Dr. Janey. It's about leadership at the top. Sometimes it doesn't matter who the chancellor is. It's about having a mayor that sets a vision, puts their shoulder to the wheel, and changes education and their head of education for the city, regardless who the other players are. And that's what I'll do. We'll have a school system, and I think we can have the best school system of any city in the country. The ingredients are there, but it takes leadership.
Thank you. Ms. Lewis.
Not only does it take leadership, it takes total 100% commitment with a plan. Standardized testing is just one measure that all educators tell us is to talk about the success that students have. And we know we have to have something, but it cannot be the only indicator. Because right now we see, not just here in the United States, but anywhere we travel, that is really now about the student as a whole. Can they think critically? What are the measures that they need in order to be successful? And so, do I believe that every school, every neighborhood should have a great school? Absolutely. We should not be busing students. We should not be having moms and dads wake up early in the morning. But you know what? One of the things that I've seen is that a parent, many who are my friends, will go anywhere to put their kid in a great school. And so from a public school perspective, not only should we be putting our money at that 0 to 8, we really have got to look at the 8th graders and people who are moving now into junior high. We have to look at our high schools because we now have pretty buildings, but what's inside of the buildings when we have graduation rates that are some of the highest in the country? We have truancy rates that are the highest in the country. And so what I would say is that calling upon all partners in the private sector, calling upon residents and citizens that are sitting right here in this room to say that we really need to take action to move our education system forward and for once and for all, really get it done and make us the city that we can be proud of, because we cannot be proud if we don't have a community where schools are at the forefront, because it is the productivity of those students that is going to make sure that all of us are prepared for the competitiveness that we're prepared.
Mr. Shalal?
Thank you very much. You know, our school system is broken here. We have more educated people per square inch in this city, more college degrees than any other city around the country, yet our school system is still broken. We have, our dropout rate in some wards is over 60%. Our functional illiteracy rate in some wards is over 50%. And if we were a state, our schools would be number 51. That is not a record to be proud of. We have gone from no child left behind to no kid left untested to no teacher left unstressed. And we still haven't improved our school system. The issue with standardized testing is anybody who has more than one child understands a standardized test does not really judge your kid's ability to do anything. That oftentimes a standardized test is there just to appease some bureaucrat. And that's not acceptable. That's not a way to be able to teach our kids. I believe that we have gone way too far with this so-called education reform. We have gone into a tear on closing schools, and when you close a school, you shut out a community, and that's unacceptable. If I'm mayor, I'll make sure that we don't close any more schools. I'll make sure that the public gets some say in what happens to the schools, and there's transparency, so that when something does happen, they're able to say why it happened and be able to buy into it, because you need that element. That's one leg of the chair that has to be in there, the public, and they've been left out of this. We spend a lot of money on our school system, and we don't have very good results. So yes, I do believe we overemphasize standardized testing. It doesn't mean you have to remove standardized testing, but putting all the emphasis on standardized testing does not make for better schools. I ask you on April 1st to vote Andy Shalal. I promise you that school reform will be real. Thank you.
Ms. Orange.
I think the key to improving our school system starts right at the beginning, and we must meet our children where they are. Our 3 and 4-year-olds must be prepared for kindergarten, but we must assess at 3. It could be the child needs glasses because he can't see the words on the book. Could be that the child needs a hearing aid because he can't hear the teacher. We need to assess the child where the child is, and maybe it's a problem at home, but we need to make sure that our 3 and 4-year-olds are prepared for kindergarten. And then from kindergarten to 3rd grade, we must ensure that our children are prepared and can read independently upon entering the 4th grade, that they can add, subtract, multiply, and divide. So I believe the standardized testing, the key test, is in the 4th grade, because our country builds their correctional system off of who can read in the 3rd and 4th grade. And the United States Department of Education is on record that a child that cannot read independently and cannot add, subtract, multiply, or divide, more likely than not, will make contact with the criminal justice system. So you can't wait until the 8th grade. That's when we have our truancy problems, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, because a child finds out they've been left behind. If you cannot add, subtract, multiply, and divide, how can I introduce you to decimals? How can I introduce you to algebra? If you haven't learned to read, when the curriculum changes in the 4th grade, reading to learn, then you can't learn because you don't know how to read. So that's where the problem lies. And so we need to meet our children where they are, assess them, and let's do them proper by treating them in the beginning and not waiting until they get in the 4th and 5th grade. Then you want to jump in and say, oh, we got to work on our 8th graders, or we got to work on our 9th graders. That's not the key. Everybody wants to talk about, the school boundaries and how pretty the school is, but if you really look at it, no one really talks about the report yesterday that came out that says that only 13% of our low-income families where the children are reading proficiently and they can add, subtract, multiply, and divide.
Okay, time is up.
87% of them can't read.
Okay, Mr. Gray.
Well, I think we should start some of these statements that we've heard with once upon a time. Let's be honest with ourselves. Did anybody hear Arnie Duncan speak last week? Did anybody hear the President of the United States speak last night in his State of the Union address? Arnie Duncan last week, the Secretary of Education, one of the best that we've ever had in that job, said that the District of Columbia is doing the best in the nation. We had NAEP scores that were, the results of which were issued in November. And what they said was that the District of Columbia, using standardized tests, of course, the District of Columbia is showing the greatest improvement in the nation of any state. The following month, the TUDA scores came out. The TUDA scores are the Trial Urban District Assessment. That measures progress in large cities. Among all the large cities in the nation, the District of Columbia has shown the greatest improvement. And the fact of the matter is that when you look at what we're doing with early childhood education, that's the investment that we are making. We now have 70% of our 3-year-olds, 92% of our 4-year-olds who are in school. We just invested another $11 million in our infants and toddlers in the District of Columbia in order to recognize that early childhood education ultimately is one of the important answers. We are developing with 9 other states a kindergarten entry assessment process that will determine whether a child is ready, not when you get to the 3rd or 4th or 9th grade and all that, whether a child is ready in the kindergarten to be able to move forward. In the course of it, we are introducing wraparound services that support our kids. We are introducing a host of other services. It isn't just about nice buildings, ladies and gentlemen. It's about the services that are provided to our children.
I want to thank all of the mayoral candidates for joining us tonight and all of the other candidates. Just one thing I want to say that I'm sure was not intentional. This is not DC for democracy. It's partly DC for democracy, but we have 5 co-sponsoring progressive organizations, and we owe them a lot for what they've contributed to making this, I think, a successful forum. Thank you all for coming, and we'll see you on the campaign trails. Thank you very much.